In 1945, the Soviet Union unveiled a rifle so well designed that America's own engineers studied it carefully and then watched it get replaced by something inferior. The rifle they rejected went on to arm dozens of militaries, fuel revolutions on 4 continents, and outlast every weapon that was supposed to make it obsolete. It still shows up in active conflicts today. This is the SKS, the rifle that aced the Cold War arms race and won everything else. The SKS was designed by Sergei Semenov and adopted by the Soviet military in 1945, right as World War II ended. It was a significant leap forward, semi-automatic, fed by a 10-round internal magazine, chambered for a new intermediate cartridge, the 7.62 by 39 millimeter, that split the difference between a pistol round and a full-power rifle cartridge, lighter to carry than a battle rifle, more controllable than a submachine gun, accurate enough for infantry engagements at realistic combat distances. By any honest measure, it was an excellent rifle, and it lasted exactly 7 years in frontline Soviet service before it was replaced by the AK-47. Here's the part that should bother you. The AK wasn't replacing an inferior weapon. The SKS worked. It was accurate, reliable, and simple to maintain. What the AK offered was fully automatic fire, the ability to spray rounds, and a detachable magazine. Those 2 features mattered enough to the Soviet military doctrine of the time that the SKS was pushed out of frontline service, handed down to second-line troops, and exported. That export decision is where the story gets interesting. The SKS went everywhere. China received manufacturing licenses and produced their own version, the Type 56, by the tens of millions. Yugoslavia made the PAP, Albania, Egypt, North Korea, North Vietnam. Every major communist-aligned military of the Cold War era received SKS rifles, and most of them built their own. By the time the AK had fully replaced the SKS in Soviet frontline units, the rifle that lost had been distributed across the developing world in numbers that dwarfed almost anything the West was fielding. And then those rifles went to war. North Vietnamese fighters carried them through jungle campaigns against American forces. African liberation movements used them through decades of post-colonial conflict. The SKS appeared in the Iran-Iraq War, in Afghanistan, in the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. Every time a conflict opened somewhere in the developing world, the SKS was usually already there, pre-positioned by decades of Cold War arms transfers, sitting in armories, waiting for someone to reach for it. What made it survive that long when the AK existed? 2 things, and they're both practical rather than tactical. First, simplicity. The SKS has a fixed magazine that loads from stripper clips. No detachable magazine means no lost magazines, no magazine compatibility problems, no failures from a damaged feed device. In armies where logistics are thin and spare parts are scarce, a rifle that loads from a stripper clip and almost never malfunctions is worth more than a faster rifle with more points of failure. Second, availability. By the 1980s and the 1990s, SKS rifles were so widely distributed and so cheaply available on surplus markets that arming a guerrilla force, a militia, or an irregular unit often meant buying SKS rifles because nothing else was that cheap or that plentiful. The economics of small wars ran on weapons that cost almost nothing and required almost nothing to maintain. The SKS fit that description exactly. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Cold War, the United States was not watching any of this happen with the SKS specifically. They were watching the AK, the weapon that replaced the SKS, and using it as the justification for developing the M16. What they missed was that the rifle they had dismissed as a stepping stone was quietly becoming the most distributed infantry weapon in the developing world. Today, the SKS is legally owned by civilians across the United States as a surplus collectible. It is chambered for the same round as the AK-47, feeds reliably, and because it is semi-automatic only, faces fewer legal restrictions than its successor. Online forums debate its merits as a hunting rifle. YouTube channels restore beat-up examples found in estate sales, and in conflict zones across sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, fighters are still carrying them into active combat. 80 years after Simonov's design was accepted, and 70 years after the Soviet Union decided it was not good enough anymore. The rifle that failed the audition is still on stage. The weapons that replaced it have mostly been retired. That is the thing about a truly simple, truly reliable design. It does not need anyone's approval to keep working. It just keeps working.